This is the Global Travel Channel podcast show, and I am your host, Mark Philpott. Welcome back to all my loyal listeners who have been here many times before. It's great to have you on board, and thank you so much for your great feedback about the show. I love doing the show, and it's always inspiring for me to get feedback from the listeners saying how much they enjoy it as well. And if you're a first-time visitor to the show today, welcome aboard. It's great to have you here. I wonder how you actually found us. Maybe it was through one of our Global Travel Channel podcast show social media sites. Maybe it was our website, our Pinterest page, or maybe it was even through our Patreon page. Yes, you can actually now contribute to the ongoing sustainability of the show through our Patreon page. Now, usually on the show, I interview incredible people around the world about their amazing travel adventures. Today, I'm taking a slightly different approach. Every now and then I'm going to produce what I call a bonus episode, and that bonus episode is going to be talking about something else in the world other than travel. Something that I'm very passionate about, something that I want to start a conversation about. And today's subject is going to be men stuff. Yes, I want to talk about men. There's a lot of press around the world, and there has been for some time now, about women and equality and the Me Too movement and all these other things that, quite rightly so, are focusing on the equality of women in our world. As a result, I believe that men are being slightly forgotten, men are being challenged about their place in the world, and also men are being given a fairly bad rap in a lot of different areas. I also am fully aware that a lot of men out there find it very hard to share their emotions, to communicate effectively, and to live their life in their best possible capacity. So what I thought I would do today was to have an episode where I spoke to another man, understood his life journey, the challenges that he's had, and to see whether or not there are commonalities there with his emotional intelligence journey than there is to a lot of other men around the world, particularly those that are listening to the show. Then I'm going to have a general conversation with him at the end of his story to find out what tools that we think men should adopt and help them move forward in life, particularly around the area of communication, in relationships, and living the best possible version of themselves. So that's what this episode's all about today. I hope you enjoy it. It's time now to go over and meet my amazing guest for the day. It's a very warm welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show to Mr. Lincoln Sharp. Lincoln, how are you today, mate?
I'm doing very well, Mark. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm really excited about today because you and I are doing something that's technically outside of my normal Global Travel Channel podcast environment, and we're going to be doing, I'm calling this kind of like a bonus episode, yeah? It's going to be one of those ones that I throw out there from time to time about something completely different. And today you and I are going to chat about a lot of men stuff, so that's going to be cool.
All right, sounds good. I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to it myself.
Now, before we get going, what I usually do is I usually give my guests the opportunity to actually dedicate the show to someone special in their lives. So who would you like to dedicate the show to today?
I always did anything and everything in my life to get me to where I am today. I dedicate to my wife. I wouldn't be where I am today without her. I wouldn't have my beautiful children. But I mean, more importantly, I don't think I would have lived to be, almost 50 in 2 months. So everything, I'm blessed to have her at my side, and I dedicate everything that I do since we've met to her.
Beautiful, mate. What's your wife's name?
Her name is Kylie.
Kylie. Okay, well
Kylie, she's down there. She's not Kiwi, but she is dual citizen. She's half Australian. She's half Australian.
Half Australian?
Yeah. Her mother, her family live in Melbourne and Townsville.
Okay.
Yeah. Her mother is originally from Melbourne, and we've been over on that side before, but her mother moved over here when she was real young. My wife's father was in the military, and they were on leave in Australia, and that's where he met my wife's mom, and the rest is history.
Brilliant. So you actually have an Antipodean connection, mate?
Yes, that is correct.
Fantastic. Well, this episode is then dedicated to Kylie and all the great things that she's done for you in your time together. Now, I think it would be a good idea for all the listeners if we started off by saying that you and I have actually never met in person. We met on a Facebook group page, and we've kind of been going backwards and forwards on all sorts of stuff since then, haven't we?
That is correct. Yeah. I feel like we're long lost friends that just reconnected again. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Looking forward to seeing you though when you do get stateside.
Yeah, likewise. And I really wanted to thank you for putting your hand up for this, because when I put the post out there on Facebook that I was going to do a show about man stuff, I didn't know I didn't know if anyone would even put up their hand. So I'm really grateful that you did, and I got a number of other guys who stepped forward as well. So it's good to see that this is a subject that men are thinking about and that men want to be part of. I thought we'd kind of talk today about all those things that, men wouldn't typically go to a bar and sit down and talk to their mates about in life, because they might feel a bit ashamed or embarrassed, or it's just not the done thing, to sit around and talk to friends about this sort of stuff. So I wanted to get into things that are like relationships, our relationship with our parents, which is a very important part of our life journey. Go back to our school years and what was our school life like, and whether we were bullied, and what are the bad habits we had in our life that were kind of, I guess, created around those school years. I want to talk about self-worth. I think that's a really important thing today. And I thought if we have a chat today, and you're 49 years old, I've just turned 55, and we've probably both been through a lot, like everybody has in their lives. And if this episode goes to helping one person out there in the world today, then we've done our job, right? That's how I'm kind of looking at it.
I would agree with you 100%. That's that's all that we could hope for, is even just one person.
Let's talk about right from the beginning, because I guess the two most important instrumental people in bringing us into this world are our parents. So do you want to start off by, I guess, sharing the story about you and your parents, and your earliest recollections of being part of that family unit when you were a young tacker as well?
Yeah, that's it's kind of an unusual story for me. I wouldn't say unusual, but it's gone from one extreme to another as I've gotten older. But as a young man, I grew up. My parents are both extremely highly educated, I should say. I believe my mother has 2 master's degrees. I think my father has at least one. He may even have 2. They both grew up in the education field. As a matter of fact, when I was real young, they continued to be in college. My mom pursued college degrees up until she was probably in her late 30s. And so I basically grew up I'm from Iowa, so I'm technically a farm boy, but we grew up in a small town it was more of a college town than a farm town. And, from an early age, I was just, I don't know, I've always been considered quite intelligent, but I never, what do they say? I never applied myself, I guess, to the expectations of some of my family members, especially with the education background that both my parents have. But yeah.
Were you one of those kids that had on their school report could do better?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was an only child till I was 7. And I don't know whether that had an impact on things or not, but when my younger brother was born, I've never had a really close relationship with him. But yeah, I became a rebel really young. And I think that my dad was a heavy drinker, and he was never home. That was quite apparent, but I do have really good memories of my father. When he was home, he spent a lot of quality time with me, taught me how to play tennis, taught me how to run track, did a lot of those things. But on the other side of it, he was gone quite a bit. He'd spent a lot of time out drinking and doing his thing. And my mother, she tried to raise me, but there's just for some reason there was just always an emotional disconnect. I don't know how to explain it, because I guess it just has to do with the way that I feel about. I have 3 children myself, Mark, and the connection, the emotional connection I have with all 3 is just something that I look forward to every single day, every single minute, and I never really felt that connection in my own family. I don't know where that came from, but. Yeah, so we went through that process, and then there was an incident at home when I was a young teenager, and my dad decided to take off. And when he left us kind of on our own. My mother, me, and my younger brother, and we ended up having to move out of the home that we lived in and moved in with my grandmother. And my shortly after that, my dad returned. About 5 months later, my dad returned, and he was sober. Hasn't had a drink since that moment, and packed us up, and we moved to Texas. I've been down in Texas for a little over 35 years now.
So looking back on your early childhood, and I think this is a really important part of our conversation today, because I think so much of our conditioning comes from our early years within that family unit, and in particular, our interaction with our parents. Would you say that you had a very loving family environment, obviously up until the time when your dad left home, but was it, looking back on it now, would you say that it was a very loving environment?
I wouldn't. I think that was one thing that, I've had my own difficulties as I've gotten older, and I've had to go through some things, and, reflecting back and kind of digging deep and being honest with myself, not a lot of affection. I don't remember a whole lot of I love yous, that type of stuff. And I'm not sure, both my parents come from large farm family backgrounds. I have several aunts and uncles on both sides of my family, and that aspect of things were a lot different. I really appreciated being around, as many cousins as I have, and as many aunts and uncles as I have. Some of my, one of my aunts I considered more of my mother than my own mother for a period of my young life, and I don't know whether that had something to do with it, that both my parents grew up in larger families, and we just had the one small family. I tended to be passed off on my families and my cousins and stuff quite a bit during the summers and stuff. So I don't know where that came from, but yeah, loving. I don't particularly remember any affection or any, definitely not a whole lot of pats on the back and saying you've done really well, that type of stuff. That's for sure.
Have you ever sat down with your parents and had a conversation with them around how they got together, how they met each other and their courtship and relationship, and how that evolved?
Yeah, we did actually. My dad was kind of a rebel when he was younger, and they grew up in a really small town. I think to this day it's still under population of about 3,000 or 4,000 people. At the time. Yeah, at the time that they grew up, it was basically a farming community, and my dad was, I guess what back in the day they were called. I think they were called hoods. They would wear the leather jackets, and they were the ones that were smoking all the time and doing, skipping school. And my dad, even through his later years, my dad was a pool shark. He was phenomenal at the game of pool. And that's where my mom had an admiration for him, and she would circle the only pool hall in the small little town that they lived in, and she would drive by and look at him in the windows. Everybody else was supposed to be at school, and my dad was down at the pool hall.
When we talk about, that lack of I love yous, and I guess that also kind of reached out into, not much intimacy as far as hugs and cuddles and all that sort of stuff. Is that something that you witnessed between your parents? Were they very cuddly, huggy kind of couple, or are that type of people?
Yeah, they were more...
Do they tell each other that they love each other a lot? Did you have that in your household? Was that part of the daily life? No,
that wasn't anything that was super strong in our family, family bond. I mean, the only emotion I ever saw from my father, I was already like, I want to say a lost soul. I was a lost child. I was probably, late teens, about to be 2021 was the first time I ever saw any emotion from my father, and I was being arrested at the time. So he had reason to be emotional, but that was really the only time that I've ever seen any kind of emotion between my family.
Were you craving it?
Yeah, looking back on it, and the way that I am sometimes today, where I do catch myself being somebody that I am. I guess I overdo things. I go above and beyond. I mean, I've put myself in the hospital 3 times from trying to do things that normal people would probably say, hey, enough is enough. And I've just continued to work related, trying to gain financial gains, things of that nature. and I've always kind of felt like I'm reaching out. I'm looking for somebody to go, hey, that you're doing great, or hey, that's phenomenal, and keep up the good work. I do that. I've done that my whole life, and I think that's what led me down the negative path of the life path that I had, where I ended up in jail so many times and near death experiences. I was accepted, and I was considered really good at being a bad guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you talked earlier about having maybe a closer connection to your cousins and people of the wider family unit, was there anybody there within that unit that became a role model for you that you really looked up to and aspired to?
Not anybody in particular, but I had a real admiration and fondness for my cousins. I had some older cousins that became Marines. I had several of my uncles and cousins were military, and that was in my younger years and growing up in my teens. That was actually something that I looked forward to. I wanted to kind of follow in their footsteps and be a Marine. I respected their work ethic. Those guys were farm boys, and every summer some of the things that they would be put to task through the community and stuff, I really admired it. I worked hand in hand with my uncles and cousins, rebuilding houses and taking care of farm and other related stuff like that. So I really, I guess that's probably where I got my work ethic and my and stuff was that type of nature, because my father really didn't have that kind of he didn't lead that kind of role model for me.
Were you happy as a young boy?
Yeah, I think I was, because maybe I wasn't. Maybe there was a dark side to me, but I made my own fun, to be honest. I did a lot of things on my own. I'm one of those lone wolf people. I don't surround myself with a lot of friends all the time. I don't surround myself with a lot of people. I mean, I am perfectly content by myself, or just sitting I could sit in a room, an empty house with just me and my wife for weeks on end if we had to. I found that I could go out and be in the dark. I could spend my time out in the middle of the night, when most people aren't out, and doing things that probably young teenagers. At one point, I wasn't even a teenager, and I was out in the middle of the night. I was 12 years old, out in the middle of the night, doing my own thing, and perfectly fine. So, I do have some happy times, but a lot of my happiest times were when I was just kind of doing my own thing.
Did you have a lot of friends at school?
No, I've never had a whole lot of friends. I know a lot of people, and a lot of people know me, but very few people know me on a real emotional and personal basis. And it's always been like that. I was smaller as a child, and we were broke. we didn't have any money. I wore homemade clothes. So, there was a period where I got picked on a lot, but I was somebody who I didn't back down to anybody. I've been beat up so many times in my life because I never backed down from anybody ever in my life, as a child and as an adult. Been smacked around, beat down, broken bones, everything, but I've never backed down. I guess that's kind of my stubbornness and stuff like that. But it's funny because I do have one friend that I met when I was about 5 years old. I'm still friends with him. That's pretty much it. I have one friend from high school that I spend a lot of time on the phone with, and a lot of time on the phone for me is like 3 times a year.
So when your brother came along, and as you said, it was 7 years age difference. How did your life change then?
At some point, I kind of think maybe that it made me jealous of my little brother. My brother definitely, and to this day, my brother gets way more attention from my family than I do, and even our extended family at this point. My brother, he was a baby, and I think maybe my mom and dad were a little bit more mature in their age and handling him than the way that they handled me. And I felt like, I did try to protect him for years. I sacrificed myself in some situations, some dangerous situations, in order to protect him. But I think my parents became enablers for him and stuff. So at some point he just became, what he is. We're polar opposites, completely opposite people. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. What star sign are you?
Aries.
And your brother?
He's Aries too.
Tell me, I'm fascinated by this thing you mentioned before about as a 12-year-old you'd go out at night into the dark. Now, what did you do? Where did you go?
Just wandering. For the first part of it, I would just wander around. I did a lot of just, I guess I was looking. I admired other people's houses. I was kind of a criminal mischief. I think I kind of got off on the idea that I was out in the middle of the night. I would steal things. When I grew up, there was where we grew up, they were called mopeds. I think nowadays they're just called scooters and stuff. But I could go find a moped that would be parked in somebody's backyard, and back then some of them had pedals on them, and you didn't need a key. You could just push them really hard and pedal them, and they would crank up. And I'd be 12 years old, drive around. But then that eventually led into I ended up running into people in the middle of the night that ended up becoming kind of the wrong kind of friends. But I think I didn't like sleeping. I never have. I'm still not a big person that enjoys sleeping, and I think that maybe it was just kind of that being out there when nobody else was out there, and hiding when people would drive by. I don't know. I got kind of a thrill from that, I think.
So what's the thing around sleeping? Why haven't you been a good sleeper for most of your life?
I'm one of those people that have nightmares on a regular.
Oh.
I have the night scares, nightmares, whatever you call them. I do not sleep very good. It's scared my wife on many occasions, and I've been like that since a child. I don't know where it came from, but I have very vivid nightmares, and it even to this day. Yeah, I'm about to be 50, and I still have them.
Wow. Have you ever had anybody look into it for you?
Yeah, I've done hypnosis twice. I tried to, not so much for the nightmares. I did try to get better sleep, but at some point, depression and stuff has crept into my life, and I've have had hypnosis on that aspect of it. But I think I was just trying to do an overall general thing and didn't have anybody really kind of dial in on what my nightmares are about. I have been in therapy and talked about my nightmares, but there was never really anything conclusive. Nobody ever said, well, this could be the reason for that. It was just, when I was younger, it was just chalked up as a kid who had a very vivid imagination. That's what I was told. But it's very real to me.
And are the nightmares, are they violent things? Are they things that really scare you, or what are they about?
Yeah, violence. And then I have silent ones that are like something's taken me from my body. So I have extremely violent ones. Those don't necessarily scare me as much as I wake up just, heart racing, sweating, completely off the bed. Things like that, of that nature. And then I have one where something is, I guess the easiest way to think of it is like there's this dark matter that's trying to take my body from me or take my soul from me. And I have a really hard time waking myself up. Those are the ones that frighten my wife, because she can tell that I'm trying to wake myself up. She can hear me making noises, and she can tell in my head that I'm screaming and yelling, trying to wake myself up.
How old were you when you first started these?
Young, probably 5 or younger. I can still remember the very first one that I can ever remember. There was somebody, to me, there was somebody outside my window, and when I yelled for my mother, I thought I was awake. When I yelled for my mother, like a skeleton or a skull came inside my room, like literally opened my door and came inside my room telling me to shut up, and was screaming at me. And I kept, I got really scared, and then I yelled again, and then eventually my mother came in. But at that point, I was already petrified. So that was definitely the first one that I ever had.
How did your mother cope with it when she first heard you doing that and she came in for the first time?
That's where the vivid imagination began. I was just told that I had a vivid imagination, and I was at that point, maybe I was 5 years old, because I was definitely sleeping in my own room. I wasn't sleeping with my parents, and I remember standing up when I thought somebody was in my window. I do remember standing up and being in the middle of my room. So obviously I was old enough to get out of my own bed and stand there. I have zero recollection of my younger years, I have zero recollection of having any affection between my parents as far as hugs and, cuddles and trying to make me feel comfortable at all.
Now, I'm really interested in talking about that aspect when it comes to becoming a father and taking all those lessons that I guess you learned through your life journey and bringing it into your parenting experience now. Is that something when you became a parent that you were very conscious of and something that you didn't want to be like with your children?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think when people say that you eventually become your parents, I think that scared me. That scared the piss out of me. Excuse my language, but it was that scared me. When my first son was born, there were nights where I would hold him as a baby, literally months old, and I would cry, a grown man crying, because I thought, I have to take better care of him and be here for him more so than my own family was. Because at that point, I was already beyond where I thought I had lived, where I thought I would have lived. I would have given every penny I had that I wouldn't have made it past the age of 25. And at that point, my son was born, I was 29, and I thought, well, I've lived this far, and I've got this beautiful human being in my arms, and I've got to be better than him. And so affection, my kids are even, I've got, my son will be 21, my daughter's about to be 18 in a few weeks. So I still pick them up, squeeze them, hug them. I'm 6 foot, 170 pounds. My son is 6'1", 190. I still grab him, squeeze him, pick him up, hug him, kiss him. It probably drives him nuts because he's trying to be his own man, and here's his dad squeezing on him. But that, I want them, when I'm gone, I want them to remember that.
So back in the school days when you were going to school and you saw other parents being affectionate towards their children when they might have been dropping them off or picking them up from school, is that something that you were consciously aware of? Did you look at those other kids and think how lucky they were to have that kind of connection to their parents, or is it something you weren't kind of conscious about?
I was very conscious of it. I spent a lot of time, two friends, Matt and Jeff, were two really close friends of mine that from when I grew up in Iowa. And I spent a lot of time with their families just because their family unit was so tight and so strong. I mean, I learned how to fish with Jeff's family. Matt's family and Matt's older brother took me in and I was always spending the night at their house. I had done that quite a few years, all the way up through my late teens. I was kind of that uninvited kid that would just kind of come over and I'd spend lots and lots of time with other people, with my friends and their families, because their family units to me just seemed more cohesive and more affectionate and more involved. And whereas me, I'd go home, and if I got attention, it was because I was in my room by myself for hours and hours and hours. I just there was no family function.
How did you cope with that in terms of when you were at home? Were you angry? Were you frustrated? How did that emotionally evolve and demonstrate itself from your behavior patterns when you were around your parents?
Yeah, I definitely became an angry kid. More so towards my mother. That was what was weird. Is I guess you could say my mother and I are very similar, stubborn, very quick to her and I were just one of those that could butt heads really, really easily. I was comfortable, like I said previously, I was really comfortable being by myself, and it didn't really bother me much. And then when I was, I could escape out through my window and get away for the night and do whatever I wanted to do, I was actually really comfortable and happy. But I definitely became an angry young man through my parents. And then, and we're being totally honest on your show here. I had an incident when I was younger that involved somebody who we knew in my family had approached me in a manner that was very uncomfortable for me. And when I brought that up to my parents, it was completely brushed away, and it was one of those things where they didn't want to hear it from me, didn't want to talk about it. And I think at that point, that's when I basically just kind of shut out my family and decided I was just going to do my own thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was going to ask you, actually, it was my next question, was to ask you whether there was a particular incident that happened in your journey as a child that kind of changed the dynamics of the relationship between you and your parents. And it sounds like it was that particular incident there, was it?
Yeah, I think that was it, and that had a very I mean, when I think about it, it still angers me to be talking about that situation or have it brought up, or that I brought it up, and I was scared, I was intimidated, I felt violated, just a lot of really strong emotions for me, and my mother basically got up and walked out, just basically didn't even want to hear me talking about it. And nothing was ever addressed, nothing ever came of it. And it was basically blown over as if it was something that I had made up, or something that was something that like I'm just supposed to just close my eyes and just ignore it. And it was shortly after that my dad's drinking at some point got pretty bad, and my relationship with my mom got more violent. And that's around the age of 15 is when everything just kind of changed for me. My whole world was turned upside down when we moved to Texas. So all that kind of coincided all together.
So do you think that was a period where you became more insular inside yourself and therefore shut off your emotions towards the rest of the world?
Oh, absolutely. I did want to reflect back onto, I think that there is such a misconception with people that haven't been in situations where that you and I have both been in. The emotional abuse can sometimes be way worse than the physical abuse.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And the emotional abuse seems to last longer. Like you were saying, you're 55, I'm about to be 50. And to this day, the emotional abuse, the things that have been, either said to us, or, just the way that they act towards us or towards people that we're friends with. Or me, my parents don't trust anybody that I hang around, any of my friends at any point, or anything that I do, period. That lasts a whole lot longer. I can get over getting beat, but the emotional aspect of it is it's so scarring. And I think so many people think, well, if you didn't get beat up, what's the big deal? I never got spanked in my life. My dad, before he left, he had one violent episode and he beat the crap out of me. And then, shortly after that, he left the house. But the emotional abuse was unbelievable.
I used to really struggle with that on so many different levels, because I had it was like a stone wall that I was confronted with, and it really had a huge impact on me. And like you a bit at school, no, not like you a bit, like you a lot. I was a loner. I used to get beat up all the time at school. I used to be different than all the other kids because I wasn't there for academia. I was a sports guy and I wanted to be following a sports career, and that was important to me. And I played tennis, so it was a very solo thing. It wasn't something that I was in a team and getting all that camaraderie from other teenage boys and all that sort of stuff. I was on a tennis court by myself with, one other person most of the time banging the tennis ball away. And then when I went home from that, I was stonewalled in this environment where there was no communication. It was, well, other than go and have your shower, have your dinner, eat your vegetables, shut up while the TV's on, go to bed at 9 o'clock and go to sleep, right? That was it. That was a lot of the existence. And when it came to my social setting at school, I found it really difficult to actually communicate with people because I wasn't having that kind of open-hearted fun. There was no humor in the house whatsoever. Like, whenever I tried to crack a joke or something, there was just nothing. Like, it was Moz. In fact, I was told not to even tell jokes because it was just pointless. They were stupid or they were ridiculous or whatever. So this conditioning, I guess, really led on to a lot of other things that we're going to talk about. But it's similar to what you've been explaining. Now, tell me, you talked about things going off the rails a bit. You started stealing a few things. Where did that journey go for you?
Yeah, from a young age, I became pretty good at breaking into places, stealing things, staying out at night. I was always, the one thing that I've always done throughout my whole life, even when I was a kid, I was always the person I always went above and beyond probably where you should have gone. Nobody ever Nobody threw as many rocks at cars as I did. Nobody broke into as many houses as I did. I still remember stealing the first car that we ever stole. I was 12 or 13 years old.
Wow.
That led to drinking. I've been drinking since I was 12, smoking, anything and everything that anybody would say could get you high. It just kind of led me down. I felt comfortable doing the things that other people weren't comfortable doing. And most of those things were the wrong things. And I don't know where that came from, but I just kind of carried that on. And through my late teens and into my early 20s, there really wasn't anything that I hadn't done as far as getting into trouble, getting into dealing drugs, getting into hanging out with mafia type people, getting into very, very dangerous situations that involve guns and Mexican cartels, and I mean, it just kept escalating from one level to another, and I was always the guy that was never intimidated by it. I guess I felt more comfortable in that role,
How did that start off? Like, were you initiated into some kind of group, or how did you find your way into this?
So when I was younger, I kind of initiated it for everybody around me. Because up in Iowa, people would get in trouble, but I always kind of led the way as far as, hey, let's leave school. I can still remember being in sixth or seventh grade, and leaving school during recess, sneaking off the playground and running over to a friend's house a block away and drinking. So I was in a way, I was kind of leading the way, the wrong way in that aspect. But when we moved to Texas, I was completely out of the ordinary. I was not a normal person here in the Texas society. I did not fit in at all, and the only thing I had going for me was my looks. I made more friends with the ladies, the young girls, right away, more so than the guys, and that definitely caused some jealousy, and that caused me to get into fights and not have very many friends right off the bat here in Texas. And at that mid-teen age, I was looking for my own security as far as emotions and all that kind of stuff. I guess I was afraid of not fitting in and being picked on. And I did eventually make some friends, and they were good people, but there was just something was missing. And then I met a guy who lived in the apartment complex that we had moved into. We lived in an apartment complex, and most of the people in my school were driving Porsches and Mercedes Benzes and stuff like that. And I was wearing homemade clothes and driving my mom's old station wagon. As a matter of fact, at one time I drove a car that the floorboard was rusted out of it, and I'm driving around with people that are driving brand new vehicles and stuff like, parents are multimillionaires and things like that. So I was really just did not fit in. But I met a guy who knew how to get some drugs, and I didn't even. It just kind of came up in conversation that he knew. He lived in the same apartment complex that me and my parents lived in, and I was playing. This is weird. I was playing tennis with my dad. And a kid that I knew, a popular kid that I knew from the high school, pulled up at the tennis courts and hollered at me, waved me over, and asked me if I could get ecstasy. And I told him I could. I said, yeah, I know somebody, because I had heard that guy in my apartment complex say that he could. And I went home that night after playing tennis with my father and talked to the neighbor in the apartments and asked him if he could get ecstasy. And he said he could, and I got some. And that's where it started. I became kind of accepted, and that's kind of where instead of being picked on, I started being kind of the popular kid, and then it just kind of steamrolled from there. And I was never initiated into anything. I was just one of those, I was somebody that if they needed something done, they knew who the crazy guy was that wasn't afraid of doing anything. And I just kind of worked my way, started with guys who wanted drugs to the guys who were providing them the drugs to the people who were bringing the drugs into Texas. I became pretty closely related with a bunch of those people, and I ran on both sides of it. And that was, put me in some scary situations, but it put me at one point I was a very intimidating person, and I told you I was small as a kid. I'm 6 foot, 175 pounds now, but when I was younger, I was always a smaller kid, and so at this point now I'm in. People were intimidated by me. I could go to parties, and I had a lot of quote unquote friends that wanted to be my friend because A, I could get them whatever they wanted, and B, the people who I was actually associated with could do some real damage to anybody that would mess with me. So that became my security blanket.
Wow. So back in the day when you were in Iowa still and you were going out at night and this kind of petty criminal activity started, was that rebellion coming out of you? Was it boredom? What was the catalyst emotion behind that?
I think a little bit of both. I agree with boredom for sure. I've always been that boredom for me. I guess it is for a lot of people, but boredom for me, I don't become productive with boredom. I become I do a lot of the things that you probably shouldn't do. Whereas opposed some people they get bored and they actually do something productive. Nowadays I'm older, it has changed, but as it took me a long time to get to that point. But yeah, definitely I think I remember stealing from my father. I stole quarters, and I had mentioned that we lived next to, it was a college town. We literally lived right across the street. We lived in student housing, right across the street from the college campus. And then we had moved into a small little rental house. Like literally, I could look out my window and see the college campus. And on the college campus, they had a video arcade in a malt shop. And I still remember stealing from my father and to go take video games. I was skipping school and I was taking quarters to go up and play video games. And I do remember that, that thrill of that, I'm stealing from my dad and I'm not doing school stuff, not doing the responsible stuff. And I still remember the day he walked into the malt shop. But I think the lack of discipline by my parents and the lack of, like you had said, there was almost no communication or no, we didn't sit around and talk about each other's day and, or how you were doing or anything like that. And so I guess, the lack of discipline, no spankings, no groundings, none of that kind of stuff. I guess I just kind of thought, well, I'll just do whatever I want to do.
I think this is something where there's a big difference between men and women where I've got a sister who's 5 years older than me, so a little bit similar to you in your age gap with your brother. We have no relationship at all, never have had, but my mother and my sister are very, very close. And I think back in the day where, and they still do it today, where they go out and they spend time together, they go shopping together, they go to, sit at a cafe and talk for hours together about women stuff. Women do that kind of stuff, whereas guys don't. And if we don't get that interaction, particularly at the age you're talking about, we go looking for it in other ways. I'm really interested to know, though, in your case, when you moved to Texas, was a different driver in play then? Were you doing it because you wanted to get noticed in the new town, you wanted to fit into the new town? Was that the motivation then over top of boredom, or how did it work out there?
Absolutely, just trying to fit in. Absolutely. I just wanted to be, I didn't want to be the poor kid from Iowa. I wanted to be, just to be accepted and then at one point, like I said, I liked being feared. I liked going places and having people, I guess you should say. I liked that part of it, but definitely. And then at one point, it definitely became. I keep using the word comfort level. I guess it's just because I just felt like it was my natural environment.
Did you ever go home at night when you were in that world and lay down on your bed and think to yourself, "What the hell am I doing?" Or was there no conscious thought around that process?
No conscious thought about the process at all. I didn't have any emotions about the things that I was doing and how I was going about them. I was the kid that would disappear for 2-3 days at a time and then show up and my parents wouldn't even say a word to me. I just kind of did my thing and I really wasn't worried about what I was doing or how I was going about it. Right before I met my wife, though, the last time I had gotten out of jail, the last time that I did tell myself that I was getting too far. It was getting too close. Like prison was becoming a reality, or being killed was becoming a reality. By the time I was 23, 24 years old, I could kind of see that, maybe my time was getting pretty close to the end. And, thank goodness for me, I lived and ended up running into my wife.
Do you regret that part of your life now?
No, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. I think it made me who I am, and I'm not sure what I would have been doing otherwise. To be honest with you, the one thing I do regret is being stubborn. I wish I wouldn't have been, and even today, Mark, I wish I wasn't as stubborn as I am towards my family. I think that there is reconciliation that can be made, but I learned the negativity.
You're talking about your mum, your dad, and your brother here,
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I wish I'd have done more for my brother. I guess that's probably the only regret, because I had the ability to get my brother out of some of the things that he got himself involved in. I tried. I really did try, but I couldn't get him away from that. I wish I'd have been a better big brother, because, I can relate to what you had said about your mother and your sister being closer. My brother is 7 years younger than me, and he is married with 3 kids, and he still lives with my mom and dad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's definitely they're a much tighter unit than than I ever was with them. But yeah, no, I don't have a whole lot of regrets, and I'm, I when I think about it, and I do have a lot of good life stories. I mean, I survived a lot of the things that I know people that didn't survive it, so I'm glad to be on this side of it, and here I am.
So what would you like your legacy to be as a man?
My children. That's very important to me.
So how did you turn it around? What was the catalyst of change for you to go from that world and into a new life?
My wife.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in love at first sight. My wife, absolutely. I don't know if you want to hear the story about how I met my wife and what that led to, but I can tell you that I was up to no good. I met my wife on Bourbon Street in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, and I was up to no good, doing the wrong things. I was still involved in some of the things that I shouldn't have been involved in, and I'd only been out of jail. I would only been out of county jail less than a year. Maybe 2 years. Maybe it was 2 years, because I was still on probation, and I met my wife.
How long were you in jail for?
I was only in jail for 3 days, two full days, and then the third day, it was like one night, one full day. The next morning took 7 hours to get me out, but that was because some friends of mine bailed me out. Some people that I know got me out of jail. But if I wouldn't have had some connections, if I wouldn't have known people that could have given me money that to get me out and get the lawyers that helped me to get out and stuff like that, I was probably looking at 2 or 3 years in prison. And I did not want that situation again, but I was still doing the wrong things. For me, jail became very comical, because I could go to I've been to so many of the smaller jails, like subsystems that lead to the bigger jails. I'd been to so many of them that some of them, especially in my hometown, they knew me by name. They knew my parents. They'd knock on my door and look for me if they thought something was going on in the small town that I lived in. It did scare me, but not enough to where I still wasn't doing some of the things that I shouldn't have been doing. And that's when I met my wife, and I had been with a lot of women, and the things that I'd done had given me access to a lot of women in all different, phases. And so I was really familiar with the ladies, but when I met my wife, I probably knew the day after I met my wife that I was going to marry her. And it wasn't very long after that that a lot of the people in my life that were still involved in my life, that still had some of that background that I had been involved in for so many years, just I started pushing them away and getting them away from me. And she brought out the emotions in me. She, without even intentionally doing it, she made me start thinking about what I was as a human being and what I had been doing, and what was actually more important was a strong bond with somebody, and a really strong emotional connection more important to me, or was my lifestyle. And I just kicked my old lifestyle to the curb, and I focused on making sure that I kept her and married her.
Do you think there was some subconscious thinking going on at that period of your life that you wanted out of that stuff anyway? And when you let yourself be open for change, that Kylie came along and she was part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I was looking for was, I was looking for somebody to give me more than hey, I know what you're capable of getting me. Or people wanted stuff from me all the time. You remember? Do you remember beepers? You
Yeah.
remember having a pager?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine used to go off about 500 times a day. And at one point, after I got out of jail, and the last time I got out of jail, my pager just quit going off. I disassociated myself with some of the bigger things. As a matter of fact, one of the guys who when I got out of jail, as soon as I got out of jail, one of the guys that I had been working for disappeared. We had been involved in some situations, and I had tried to separate myself from him, and thank goodness I had, because he ended up disappearing. No one's ever seen him. He's just kind of disappeared off the face of the earth. I think he's been dead a long, long time. And I thought, well, my time's probably getting pretty close, but I really didn't have anything strong to get me to like grab my hand and get me out of that situation. But I knew in the back of my head I was getting close. Like I said, I knew I was getting close. I was getting close to that where I probably wasn't going to live. And when I met my wife, she was the first person where the affection came, because she was affectionate towards me. She didn't want anything from me. She didn't ask for anything from me. She wasn't involved in any of the stuff that I was involved in. And when I recognized that, I felt it. There was a strong emotion for me right away.
Was it the first time in your life you'd felt it in that way?
Oh, absolutely, yes. In that form, yeah. I could tell right away that there was something real there, and I didn't have to, I didn't have to do anything to like, I guess, beg for it or reach out for it or anything like that. It was just kind of like, it was just naturally, she was just naturally gave me the affection and the attention without anything else involved. There was no negativity involved. She wasn't trying to change me as a human being. She wasn't asking me for anything. She wasn't using me for anything. And I felt that right away.
So how was that after so many years of being out in the cold, so to speak, when it comes to emotional connection?
It's still a work in progress. We've been together 25 years, and I'm way better today than I was 5 years ago, and 5 years ago I'm way better than I was 5 years before that. But I'm still very, I can still be very alone or cold. I guess I can be defensive. I think you kind of grow up defensive quite a bit when you're afraid of being hurt, or you're not getting the specific love and attention from your mom and dad, and then when you do, it tends to be negative, or telling you to mind your own business, or that type of stuff. I get really defensive really easy, but I'm better now, and I'm better at communicating myself. I'm an extremely violent person. I always have been, and I think that's what's helped me survive all the things that I've survived. But I had to take those tendencies. I had to tone it way down. We've never had any altercations like that or anything. But I tend to, for the first 4, 5, 6, 7 years, if if her and I had a disagreement or argument, I was outside, punching walls or kicking cars and doing stuff like that, because that was just what I was naturally used to doing, and that was my normal outlet. But as after my son was born, and trying to raise my kids and make sure that they never saw that, or hopefully better yet, never didn't have that genetic part of them as well. And luckily I've been blessed. My kids, they're intelligent, very sociable, incredible young kids, and they do not have my temper. So it's been a blessing.
In addition to what Kylie brought your life and your children, obviously, after that, have you done any work in terms of personal development to help you, I guess, gain connection to yourself in lots of other ways? And I'm talking about things like maybe meditation or anything else along the personal development lines?
Yeah, I do meditate. I try to meditate twice a day. I can tell the days that I don't, for sure.
Yep. How long have you been meditating for? When did you start?
Last year, I really started finding. I quit drinking last year. That was my final stand. Bud Light beer was my final sin, my final vice. I got away when I met my wife. I got away from all the synthetic drugs, and then I was still drinking. And then over the last 15 years or so, I've literally only drank Bud Light. And last year, I finally got that out of my life. And so meditation came in. I've always been in really good shape. I'm a blue-collar worker, so I've always been in really good shape. So exercise and stuff has meant a lot to me. But meditation, I think more people should do gratitude lists. Gratitude is something that is way overlooked, and just having a joyful life. In order to enjoy life more, you need to be grateful for even the smallest things around you. Before it's gone, before your life, flashes before your eyes. Those types of things are definitely stuff. Just going and seeking help meant so much to me. I was stubborn at first, but the speaking out, that's why I was so glad to be part of this and to be talking with you, because at some point, if somebody else can relate to what you and I have been through, and kind of understand where we are and what we've done to get where we are in our lives, then that I actually had to learn that through therapy myself.
So why do you think it's so difficult for men to talk like you and I are today? How many people in your life know the story that you've shared with me today?
Everything, not very many. There are quite a few people who know what my past has been, but not very many people know to the detail of the things that I've been in. My wife is the only true possessor of most of the things that I've done, and that's because she's been through therapy with me, and she's also sat through my nightmares. I still have some of the nightmares, but I can say it's real difficult. I don't think that you can have conversations like this with most men, and I think it's just I think it's a fear. I think there's a lot, and I'm going to say words that may offend people, but I think there's a lot of immaturity in men that think that if they talk the way that you and I are communicating tonight, that it's a sign of weakness. It's like a grown man that's afraid to cry.
I agree with that, and I would like to share something with you. I was locked up to some extent in the corporate world for many, many years, and I found that extremely difficult because I found it extremely difficult to connect with men in that world. They were all out to live that macho political life within the corporate area. And even though I worked for a fantastic company that was very much like a big family, but even so, if you weren't part of the drinking culture within that company, you weren't part of the guys, the guys that used to get together at the pub every Friday night or whatever it was, or you weren't invited to the parties that they were having, and you felt very isolated within that world. And it was another part of my life journey where I was always, I guess, really wanting to have that connection with another man or men that I could actually talk to about all these things that I'd been through, but I couldn't find men, or men couldn't find me as well, I guess, in terms of the ones I wanted to connect to on that level. It just didn't seem to be there. And I used to run a men's group. I've run several men's groups around the world, actually, and one of the common themes that have come out of those men's groups is I don't have, and I'm speaking on behalf of the participants, I don't have an environment where I feel safe, where I can say how I actually feel without being judged. And now I wanted to get into talking to you about that within a relationship, because I feel as though many men are in a relationship with a woman who they feel judged them on the feelings and the emotions that they actually share. And as a result of that, the men are still reluctant to open up more and actually share their journey, because there's two types of experience out there. There's the one where you share something and then the other person immediately wants to try and fix you, or you've got someone in your case with Kylie, who's a natural born winner and around that, and she just goes about accepting you for who you are, and as a result of that helps you change into the person that you want to become without Kylie having to be telling you every minute of the day, here, you should do this and you should do this and you should do this. Is that another fair comment?
Yeah, you're spot on. You are. No, I would agree with that again. And I think maybe, when somebody brings up, and I started thinking about this when you were talking about, and then, you had somebody mention, why don't you have kids? I think I think that's what happens to a lot of men, is they start questioning their own self-worth, because society as a whole, a majority of it, have this quote unquote, the stereotypical thought of what a man should be, or what, if you're a real man, then you're very successful. If you're a real man, then you've got a family, you've got kids. If you're a real man, you have a strong bond with your mother. I see those things all the time in my own interactions with the small group of people that I associate with, where, if it's not, hey, how come you don't have kids? It's, well, you're a man. How come you're not vice president of a business or a company? Or how come you don't, like in my situation, I'm no longer the breadwinner. And that's always an awkward situation when you're in a group of people, especially a group of people that don't know me, that, maybe we're meeting through one of my wife's company's functions, and it's always brought up, what do you do for a living? I mean, there's this stereotypical thing that people, they automatically think that a man should be, and I think that puts a lot of pressure on men. And I think it has a very negative effect on men mentally and emotionally. And it can lead to domestic violence situations, or like you said, luckily I've been very, very blessed with a wife who has never tried to change me. She has never tried to do anything other than just support me and love me, and has said, hey, I see who you are as a person and not what you've been. But I also know people who have been married 3 times because they marry girls who, drive them crazy and push them into situations, or try to change them and try to make them men that they aren't. And I think that probably has a lot to do with why a lot of men don't even like to communicate or talk. They let it out with violence. They let it out by, like you said, domestic violence. They don't know how to communicate, because there's this stigmatism that you're weak, either A, if you show emotion, or B, you're not super successful, or you're raising children and all that other stuff that I think it's very, very unfair.
Yeah, I like what you said. There's a lot there to unpick. I think in terms of one of the things that represents the journey of becoming a parent is really interesting, that I've been a witness of for many years, that I've watched why people become parents. I've always asked the question why some couples have actually become parents when either the woman or the guy hasn't got their own life drama sorted out. And I'm thinking, why would you want to go and do the most important job in the world, bringing another child into the world, and you haven't got your own shit sorted out? And like I started meditating last year, probably around the time you did, Lincoln, and meditation has really, really helped me on so many different levels, and I can't speak highly enough about it. But I'm in my early days with meditation, and I'm the first to say, well, I'm still understanding the power of it, first of all. And as a male that was kind of had all these thoughts going through his head 100 miles an hour a day, I was never able to sit in a state of flow and to feel that oneness with myself, where I wasn't thinking about, the next podcast I'm going to make or the next business I wanted to start or whatever. And since I've been doing that, I've been able to let go of a lot of these other things that have been impacting my life because I've been consciously focused on that. Have you had that experience as well?
Yeah, with meditation, when I first started, they tell you it's okay if your mind wanders. It's okay if your mind wanders because you're still trying to, learn how to get to that calmness. But I definitely, I had mentioned that I can tell the days that I don't. Because like you, my head, I tend to wander and maybe even worry or future trip or put things in my head that don't necessarily need to be there. But when I bring myself to that consciousness, when I bring myself down to meditation and have the breathing, and even if my mind wanders a little bit and I can find a little bit of focus, there is that definite that there's more clarity in my day. I guess that's how I notice it. When I haven't done it, I'm more scrambled about. But when I have concentrated on it, especially if I've done it before I've gone to bed, those tend to be even better nights of sleep. But yeah, I definitely can tell that the things that normally would be rattling around in there all the time, there's it kind of masks it a little bit and calms it. But you're right. We're just in the early stages of it, and I enjoy it. The more I get into it, the more I enjoy it.
Let me ask you this. We've just started a new decade. We're in 2020 now. There's a lot of things going on around the world where there's a big shift going on, I feel, in a lot of different areas of humanity at the moment. If you and I walked into a bar in Texas tonight and we yelled out of the top of our voices that, hey, guys, anybody here want to come down the road to a meditation session? Do you think we'd be laughed out of that bar, or do you think, some people would be interested in coming down to a meditation session with us?
I think there'd be some people interested in coming down. I think more so than 10 years ago, for sure. Plus, it depends on what kind of place we went into, but there would definitely be. I also think that there would be more people that would probably laugh at us in the moment, and then as soon as they got home, wish that they had gotten our phone numbers and asked us to come on down.
That's a really interesting fact. So, to me, when I ran these men's group that I was telling you about, one of the things that I asked each man as they came into the group was, why did you decide to come? What was the catalyst, right? Because I also, just on that note that you just made, that men are very reluctant to try things that challenge their emotional state of affairs. They feel very uncomfortable with that. And unless there's what I call a safe and non-judgmental environment, and that's why I created these men's groups, because the first thing I respected out of every man that came into that room was, you will not be judged in here, and you can say whatever you want. It's not going to go out of this room. And to this very day, there's men that have come to that group who, and I don't do it anymore, by the way, men who came into that group, and they said the only reason I decided to come was because I felt as though it was going to be safe and non-judgmental. So how do we take that environment into everyday living, where you can't have every man going into a men's group because it's just not going to work? But how do men create an environment that's safe and non-judgmental in today's world? Who do they talk to if they can't communicate to their partner?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I found it.
Is that one of the problems we're confronted with? Is that we don't have somebody that we feel we can go to have these kinds of conversations?
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to give you because as you were saying that, I was trying to think to myself, but on a personal basis, I went through the same thing. I'm married to a beautiful, wonderful woman, but some of the things I can't sit down and talk to her about. My lack of self-worth for a period of my life, because I was no longer the breadwinner, and other things that had gone on in my life, things that had happened when I was younger. There's communication that you can have with your loved ones and stuff, but then there's a difference when you sit in a room, and I'm going to give you a personal experience about that. So when I went into therapy, and by the way, let me just say that it's harder and harder, I think, nowadays to find privacy or somebody that's going to trust an environment where there is not going to be any judging it's going to be harder to do that in a day where technology is, and all the social media things, and how everybody is so judgmental about every aspect of every single person's life, whether they've got their own shit together or not. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But for myself, when I went into to get myself better, I wasn't sure that I was going to enjoy a men's group. I went into a men's group, and it was assigned to me by my counselor. And he said, I can tell that there's some sort of they call it early childhood trauma, ECT. And he said that I can tell that there's something there that you're just not sharing in this. It was a co-ed group. And I said, yeah, no, I mean, I'm trying to, but I'm not real comfortable. And so he had me go into this men's group. And it was one of the most liberating things that I've ever done in my entire life, was sit in a men's group in a completely trusted and confidential environment, and share some of the things that had gone into my life, listen to some of the things that had gone on in other men's lives. And I mean, I literally, it felt like when I was in the building, it felt like somebody had taken the roof off the building. And I wish more men would have the chance to experience that, because it's very uplifting. You feel lighter. You have the old adage of, I finally got like the monkey off my back, or it's like a weight lifted. It's a whole lot more than that. To me, it's like a whole new consciousness. You reach something that I honestly didn't think I could ever. The emotional and freedom that I felt was something that I never felt like I had never felt before. And I know for a fact that several men inside the group and outside the group admitted the same thing. Men that you would look at, and probably rougher backgrounds than you or I had, and they were coming out of those groups saying the same thing. And I got into a really dark period last year, and I owe really probably my life, not only having my wife by my side, but that men's group meant so much to me. It meant a lot to me, and I wish more people had the chance to have an experience like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I had experiences where within the men's group that we were running was, there was one guy who was really suicidal, and he came good, and actually he turned his life around significantly. And he was in a broken marriage. He was in a really, really bad state. And he actually said to us during one of the meetings, I'm going to go and kill myself. And it was terrifying. It was we didn't want him to leave that day. It was, how do you deal with being confronted with somebody who's that depressed, right? And there were other guys there who were all at different stages of their emotional intelligence evolution. And it was really beautiful to see I use the analogy of a daffodil flower that was just blooming, right? And as the weeks went past, and it didn't take long, in a couple of weeks, you saw these guys become so much more comfortable within themselves, and you could see the self-worth and confidence coming back. And I'm saying this because if there's women out there listening to the show today, you don't have to be the fixer and the catalyst of change to your man. And in fact, there's a good chance that you're not going to be, and I'm not being judgmental on you when I say that. I'm just saying that maybe your man needs to experience what Lincoln and I are talking about, which is that safety net that can only be provided by other men, because by being in that environment with other males who actually get it because they're a man, and who actually understand what it's like to go through that as a man and come out the other side, it can only help your relationship, because that guy will come home a happier person, a more self-aware person, and I'm sure that you'll see dramatic changes in your relationship. So get your man along to men's groups. Any other thoughts around that?
I would say that it is harder, and just from my own personal experience, and maybe even some men have tried this and then found their own roadblocks with it. But even within my own therapy, we had tried some alternative therapy, and there's groups out there, especially I'm a recovering alcoholic, and so there's the groups here in the United States. I guess they're worldwide, but the hypocrisy that's in some of those, and some of the ways that they treat some of the guys that are actually struggling to reach out and find some sort of support and some help, and then they have some sort of backlash, whether it be to them directly or they witness it through communications that these guys have with other members. It can lead these guys to not trust it. I for one went through that the very first part of my hospital stay. That was something that I noticed right off the bat was, they're very welcoming and they want you to come in and get some help. But then, within the same session or maybe the next session, they turn around and they bash somebody that doesn't agree with them wholeheartedly or isn't willing to be, like you said, some people are just, they're hesitant to come out of that shell, and maybe they need a little bit more time than somebody else. And if they're not doing it right away, then they're considered somebody that's not participating, and you start accusing people of that and they don't want to participate in it. It's very hard to find a group where you can trust somebody, a very trustworthy group. And like you, but you just kind of made the comment where you were advertising a men's group. I wish that there was more of that, to be honest. I wish that there was something that, somebody, hopefully somebody can listen to this and go, hey, Lincoln and Mark they're real dudes, and we're not judging. We're very open. I mean, we're sharing more about each other, probably more so than we would anybody to each other. We're sharing more to each other than we probably would to somebody else, that's more directly close in our lives. But hopefully they can see that it is possible, but it's hard. I found it difficult myself, and I'm really glad that I did. I'm really glad that I was able to find that. But, I guess you have to get to that real deep, dark place first before you try to seek that light.
Your example today has been a beautiful one where you met Kylie at a stage of your journey where you were kind of like, okay, the next step of if I keep going down this path, it's not going to end well. And then all of a sudden, because you were putting that energy and that vibration out into the universe, Kylie miraculously appeared on New Year's Eve in Bourbon Street, and there you were, and that changed your life. I find there's always a epiphany moment, and it can be somebody coming into your life. It can be, as you just said, that really dark cloud that doesn't go away, that makes you realize that, hey, either I don't get out of bed every day because it's too bad, or I actually want to change this. It can actually be something as simple as watching a video on YouTube about something motivational that makes you realize, hey, I've got to start the change. The big thing for me is, where do you go to start that change? And if you're not into meditation, if you're not into men's groups, it can be difficult for men. As I said earlier in the show today, women gather together on a regular basis to do stuff where they have lots of time, where they share stuff with each other. And I actually really love that about the whole nature of being a woman, because they get to go, they make time to go to coffee shops and sit down and chat for hours about their life and their relationships, and guys don't do that. And it's a shame, and it's just because, again, it's the drinking culture, the beer thing, the whole, let's go out and get pissed, and let's be macho, and let's watch a footy game on TV at the bar or whatever. Women go out and they have a meaningful conversation about all the things that are going on in their lives. And I think if more men did that, in a way, in creating an environment. And I remember back in the day where I used to go and do sports stuff. I used to run marathons, and I used to go with my mates and we'd do training runs for 2 or 3 hours. But during those 2 and 3 hours, we'd talk about our life. We'd talk about all these incredible things. And I got home, and not only did I feel physically fit from having that exercise regime, but I also felt emotionally lighter because I actually had that deep, meaningful conversation with my mate when I was running. So I think it's also about, the environment is such an important thing. I think this is such an important topic. That's why I'm so passionate about it. I'm going to invite the audience here to participate in a roundtable conversation on the next podcast show about men stuff. I'm going to invite you back, Lincoln, and if we can get a couple of other guys on the show with us, and let's turn this into a kind of not a debate, but a roundtable conversation about what we're talking about here, and get a couple of more people's perspective and experiences in life and all the rest of it. Would you like to be part of that?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't feel like we've been on talking for as long as we have, but I think that just goes to show you how it's a very positive thing. I mean, I feel better. I'm glad that we've been talking. I could talk for another 2 hours if we had.
Yeah, me too. So that's why I'm suggesting. I think let's hope that this show today has opened a door. And if there's somebody out there listening to this and you want to take that brave next step and come on to the show and talk, but this might be the first step towards that journey. And who knows, we might invite a woman on as well to get a female perspective on this, because I think one of the dangers I see around the world at the moment with all this Me Too stuff and that going on, we see a lot of division going on between genders. And I think the more that we can actually cross-communicate, the more that we can share our feelings with each other, whether it be male or female or any other gender association, I think is really important, because there's too much going on in this world that tells us we've got to be on one side or the other. And that's not what life is about as far as I'm concerned. It's about being, conclusive together, getting through struggles together, building a life together, building association and communication together. So maybe we definitely have a woman on the panel as well next time around, Lincoln.
Sounds good.
Maybe it's Kylie. Maybe you want to talk to Kylie about coming on.
Maybe we'll get Kylie on here. She would kill us with optimism and happiness. That's what she's good at. She's
fantastic. Well, we want a lot of that. So, look, I'm going to wrap it up for today, Lincoln. As you just mentioned, I could go on for another couple of hours, but I hope that once I get this show edited, that we're going to get something substantial out there for somebody to think about their life a little bit more. We hope it's a catalyst for change for somebody to think about getting out there and talking and communicating at a level maybe you haven't done before, and see what good can come out of it for you.
No, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you inviting me on. I'm glad to be on, and I'm looking forward to talking again.
Good. Well, you and I are going to stay in touch, that's for sure. And all that's left for me to say is have a beautiful evening over there in Texas. Don't go out wandering around the neighborhood and stealing any cars tonight, mate. Stay inside. Stay inside.
Stay home tonight.
Stay home and be a good boy. Yeah.
Thanks. I will. Thank you.
Okay, Lincoln. We'll see you soon.
All right. Later, Mark.
There we go. That was my guest today, Mr. Lincoln Sharp, talking to me from Texas in the United States of America. Quite a journey, I'm sure you will agree. And I don't know whether any of that information would resonate to you if you're out there listening today as a man or even a woman and listening to particular behavior traits that your partner might be having and might be challenged with. I'd be really interesting to know and having your feedback on today's show. My intention is to do more shows like this. I would love other men to put their hand up to come on the show and talk about their challenges in life, but also about some of the things that they're doing to turn their life around. That would be great to hear from you if you want to get in contact with me. Okay, well, that's the end of this particular episode. Don't forget to check out the Global Travel Channel on our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. Plenty of other amazing episodes there for you to listen to. That concludes today's show. So all that's left for me to say is my name is Mark Philpott. Until we meet again, I wish you all a very safe and happy bon voyage.